Hello and many thanks for joining us on our 2018 end-of-year review special across different sectors. Well, it is time to take a look into the highlights of Nigeria's business sector in 2018. The Nigerian economy experienced both positive and negative growth in some sectors. Here are some of the activities that made the headlines. It was a very busy business year in 2018. Here are some of the stories that made the headlines.
Right behind me is the former Sky Bank, which is now known as the Polaris Bank. As at Friday, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in consultation with the Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation, revoked the license of Sky Bank as a result of it being a growing concern, its inability to meet its minimum threshold, its permanent stay at the CBN lending window. However, the Central Bank of Nigeria has assured depositors of the safety of their funds. They have also assured that the management and staff of the then Sky Bank would continue operations with the new Polaris Bank.
With the announcements of the takeover, some customers remained unperturbed.
What I did was this morning, I went to the nearby Sky Bank nearest to me and do a transaction to know if there's any thing, but the transaction was okay.
I also caught up with the head of research, Victor Ofili, at Kari Asset Management, who shared his thoughts regarding the takeover.
I would say the bank bit more than it could chew. When you acquired Main Street Bank back then in 2015, okay, it acquired not just the deposits, but also the loans. So that tended to give the bank an unfavorable capital adequacy ratio.
Barely 3 months later, Diamond Bank and Access Bank both agreed to a merger, largely due to capitalization issues faced by Diamond Bank. The announcement followed Uzoma Dozie, CEO of Diamond Bank, bringing to the public's notice that Diamond Bank had dropped its international license and had become just a national bank. The merger, when completed, would hence make Access Bank the largest bank in Nigeria by asset base. CEO Access Bank Herbert Wigwe took to the official Access Bank Twitter account to speak of the value addition the merger portends for both parties.
The most persuasive part of this transaction is the customer benefits. Diamond Bank and Access Bank share many of the same areas of focus: women, youth, entrepreneurs, and the financially excluded. And this makes this an exciting and compelling transaction. But we should remember that Diamond Bank's corporate customers will also benefit directly from Access Bank's expertise, whether that's in trade finance, cash management, treasury, or corporate finance. The combination of our genuine strengths in retail and corporate banking and what that means for Nigeria is another significant part of the rationale for this transaction.
And shaking investors' confidence was a sanction by the Central Bank of Nigeria when it slammed a fine on technology giant MTN for allegedly repatriating funds out of the country, as well as CBN's 5.87 billion naira fine it slammed on 4 other financial institutions, as it claimed they were involved in the alleged illegal fund repatriation. The 4 banks were Standard Chartered Bank, Stanbic IBTC, Citi, and Diamond Bank. Stanbic IBTC was fined 1.885 billion naira, Standard Chartered Bank was fined 2.47 billion naira, Citibank 1.265 billion naira, and Diamond Bank 250 million naira. According to the Director of Corporate Communications at Central Bank of Nigeria, MTN had illegally repatriated $8.134 billion out of the country. Following CBN sanctions, MTN filed a suit against CBN and the Attorney General of the Federation, categorically and unequivocally denying all charges by CBN and AGF, which encompassed the AGF Attorney General, Malam Abubakar Malami, demanding the mobile operator refunds the government the accumulated tax arrears of $2 billion owed over the last 10 years. The two parties, however, decided to engage in settlement talks. The Central Bank of Nigeria, according to a statement by MTN, has reduced the amount it claimed MTN repatriated to South Africa from $8.1 billion to $52.6 million. Speaking of which, the 2018 national budget, which was first presented by the President Muhammadu Buhari in 2017, had the appropriation bill signed into law in June 2018, with rising issue of budget padding as the National Assembly made cuts amounting to 347 billion naira in the allocation of 4,700 projects submitted to them for consideration. Rather, 6,403 new projects were introduced, amounting to 578 billion naira. Johnson Chukwu, CEO of Kari Asset Management, shared his thoughts on this.
The process of interaction, consultation, engagement that should take place ahead of submission of the budget inputs seem not to be taking place. Ideally, in a presidential democracy, members of the National Assembly are also influence peddlers. And when they might be influence peddlers, they are authorities that have the capacity to influence projects. That's on the one side. But in no democracy do you have the National Assembly members as executors. But the situation where you have the executive prepare a budget, the National Assembly will now not almost amend that budget. It's not what a democracy should be.
And in a bid to avoid the repetition of the late budget implementation, the President presented the 2019 budget on the 19th of December. Hopefully, the appropriation bill is signed earlier and funds for projects will be disbursed.
The implication is that the current expenditure alone is taking close to around 50% of the budget. By all standards, we can't say that is a good thing because when you spend a lot on the current expenditure, it means you're not
making profit.
You're not creating growth. Yeah.
Where we are right now, OPEC has pegged Nigeria's daily production to 1.69%. Let's even say 1.7. What that essentially means, and this decision came out on the 7th of
December,
this month, and I'm surprised that this budget was read 2 days ago. That was not factored in. So from the get-go, it means that we're already running a deficit budget. If you go contrary to what OPEC has mandated you to, it means that you are breaking certain rules and understandings or conventions that you signed to. And if you don't want to play by their rule, it means that you have to do what Qatar did, exit OPEC. So these are the issues.
UNESCO recommends at least 15% of the budget should be allocated. They recommend that 15% of the budget should be allocated to education as a minimum. And it's worse still when you consider that Nigeria has the highest number of out-of-school children. Over 10 million children are out of school in Nigeria, and it's the highest in the world. So obviously, what we should be doing where education is concerned is upping our game.
Finally, moving on to the Nigerian Stock Exchange, where the activities of the economy are reflected on a daily basis to encourage environmental sustainability and mitigation of climate change. The Debt Management Office listed a $30 million sovereign green bond on the Nigerian Stock Exchange in July.
Nigeria is the fourth nation in the world to issue green bonds after Poland, France, and Fiji.
The issuer is the federal government of Nigeria, so as most of you would know, that represents, I would say, zero risk within our environment. So the risk is low for any investor. Apart from having a fulfillment of having invested in a product that you could call ethical, the risk is low. And we list our securities because we want them to be traded, so there's liquidity afforded to the investor.
And as the elections draw closer, the Nigerian stock market has seen a significant drop in its market capitalization with increased capital flight and foreign portfolio investment.
We've seen the Fed rate going up, and foreign portfolio investors are leaving emerging markets and frontier markets, of which we belong. And more so for the election that is upcoming in January next year. That definitely has a major point to play in Nigerian economy. We've seen this happen in year 2014, and again it's coming up, year 2015, and again it's coming up in 2019. Whenever this is coming up, we see a situation whereby investors would rather stay aloof from the market, pending the time they will know which direction it's going to go. Because the election is a real business and the main determinant for what happens thereafter. So sure, investors are also very conversant with safety of their investment, and if there is no continuity in the incumbent government, then definitely investors will not really want to leave their investment while the election happens. So this and more are what are actually affecting the market for now.
Hopefully, 2019 comes with better economic reports. For Plus TV Africa, I am Irene Ubani.
And there you have it. Here with me in the studio to speak on the business activities and highlights in 2018 is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you very much. And compliments of the students.
Thank you, same to you.
Great.
Let's begin with the banking sector. We saw quite a number of activities happening. We saw Skybank's license taken away and then Diamond Bank's as merging with Access Bank. Should this be a cause for concern for the investors and most especially customers of these banks?
No, not necessarily. You see, one of the major functions of the Central Bank of Nigeria is to ensure financial system stability. And a major component of that is to exercise very good and effective oversight over the banks to ensure principally that depositors' funds are not put at risk, to ensure that no bank actually goes under. So what has happened, I think, is a very good preemptive action to ensure that we don't see a total collapse of these banks.
Yes.
Because if banks begin to collapse, first, it has implications for the confidence in the entire banking system. It has implications for the security of jobs of those who are employees. It has implications for the safety and security of depositors' funds. Of course, it also has implications for the shareholders, who are the ultimate bearers of the risk of the investment. So what has happened is that the decision of the central bank to intervene, either by way of facilitating a merger or by the way of facilitating a complete takeover of the bank, I think it's a very good step in the right direction. And if anything, it will also further serve to, scale up the level of confidence in our financial system. Because we are not talking here about a bank that's failed. We are not talking about depositors that have lost their funds. We are just talking about banks either merging or being taken over. I think that is a good development for our financial and banking system.
Okay, if you say so. Yeah. We still talking about the Central Bank of Nigeria. We saw it consistently intervene in the foreign exchange markets, but then we also saw that it affected our foreign reserves. It moved from $47.5 billion as of July to $43 billion as of December. Would you say that this was a good way of taking care of or managing our forex?
Yes. It is a way that is central bank's own model of managing the forex market.
Do you think this is a good way,
Now, whether it is sustainable or not is the issue. You see, that kind of model can only be sustainable if you have steady supply of foreign exchange. And as you know, the major source of our foreign exchange earnings is the oil sector, oil and gas.
Yes, yes.
To the extent that we had very good, at least for most part of the year, we had good oil price performance. We had good performance in the area of oil output. Output was steady. So the capacity to intervene was there by the central bank. So that is the context in which that model can work. And
but
context
how
in which
is this? Because we are seeing the price of oil dropping.
Yes, I'm getting to that. Okay. Because this is a question of context. If the context changes, the model may not work. Because we're already beginning to see pressure on the market.
Oil prices, yes.
We are seeing pressure on the exchange rate. We are seeing pressure on the reserves.
True.
If oil price continue in this downward trend, it may not be sustainable. It may not be it will be very difficult for the central bank to continue to intervene the way it has been intervening. If it continues that way, it will undermine the totality of the base of the macroeconomic environment and the confidence that we have. It could lead to a very fast and rapid erosion of our foreign reserves. And if that begins to happen, it will have more serious consequences. So my proposition is that if this trend continues, the CBN will have to review its strategy to ensure that there is stability. increasingly it may become difficult to sustain the exchange rate at current levels. Already we have issues with some of the exchange rate mechanism that we have, exchange rate management mechanism, because we have series of rates, multiplicity of rates, which is also not good for the system. But whatever it is, if the situation continues, there may be need to allow a framework, to put in place a framework for foreign exchange management that will reflect the fundamentals of the market. When I say fundamentals, it has to be put within the context of the current levels of demand and the context of the capacity to fund the market, the capacity to supply the foreign exchange. If you have all those two contexts, then that should what should determine what ultimately the framework should be and what ultimately the exchange rate should be. Unless we create a bigger scope for the market, we may run into the kind of crisis we ran into some 3 years ago, when there was almost a total collapse of the economy and the foreign exchange market. It led to a major loss of confidence, and there was a lot of crisis.
Investors' confidence had dropped significantly at the point.
So the CBN has to be very strategic in dealing with this situation. We cannot afford to hold on rigidly to a single model or hold on rigidly to the fact that this exchange rate must not decline or it must not depreciate. That model cannot work. So that is the position.
All right, still speaking on this, more importantly is, no matter how much we talk about, the economy at the higher pyramid, we need to talk about those that are on the lower pyramid. And we see a lot of SMEs complain about the fact that interest rates are still high. We had the Monetary Policy Committee meeting. Yes, fine. The interest rates were still left at 14%. But then we still have commercial banks charging rates at 20 to 35%. How sustainable is this? Because for these SMEs, they don't feel like this is encouraging enough.
Yes, there's a bit of a dilemma when it comes to issues of interest rate management. What is desirable in an economy like ours that wants to create jobs, that wants to stimulate growth, that wants to stimulate employment? What is desirable is to ensure that we have credit that is affordable, credit that you can use for long-term projects. That is what is desirable under normal conditions. But the argument of the central bank has been that lower interest rates could pose liquidity challenges. I know there's a liquidity problem that could create problems for the foreign exchange market. It could create problems even for the reserves, because the position of the CBN is that once liquidity increases, the demand for forex will increase.
But sometimes
the pressure on foreign reserves will also increase, and that may affect some very critical macroeconomic fundamentals. So we have to make a choice whether I want to deal with the issue. Of course, the CBN argues about inflation, that if there's an increase in liquidity, it could be driven by lower interest rates. It could be a risk to inflation. So when you are dealing with economic issues, you have to make a choice depending on what the priorities are at the moment.
But we see the Central Bank of Nigeria mopping up, going through processes of liquidity mop-up sometimes.
Yes. It's because the CBN doesn't want a situation where first inflation will go completely out of hand. It doesn't want a situation where there will be excessive pressure on the foreign reserves and on exchange rates. So it's a question of choice. For people like us in business, we believe that the priority at this time should be how to stimulate growth. Because you have to choose between stimulating growth and creating jobs and ensuring that you moderate inflation and you preserve exchange rate stability. It's a choice between the two. But for an economy that is suffering from serious problem of unemployment, because we are talking of unemployment rate now of about 23%, millions of Nigerian youths, by the time you add unemployment and underemployment, you are talking of something in excess of 50%. That portends a lot of danger to the economy and to the social stability of the country. So the priority of policy, for me, should be that we should be focusing more on things that can stimulate growth and stimulate employment. So for me, it is better to go for a lower interest rate regime so that there can be more domestic investment. Because just look at it. If you have an interest rate of 25%, 30%, What business can you do profitably and sustainably? What business?
I mean, with the power situation,
with
before you know
all the other
spent,
costs, all the other things, I mean, how will the business survive? And yet you say you want jobs to be created. You say you want taxes to be paid by businesses. How will it go? How will it work? And there's no way you can progress an economy if there is no investment. It is impossible. There's no way you can create jobs if there is no investment. And the investment will be such investment that are sustainable. Not just an investment that you set up today, tomorrow it packs up. That is not the kind of investment that will be there for the long haul. And preferably even long-term investments. Because sometimes the policy configuration is such that seems to want to attract more of portfolio investors. And portfolio investments are hot money. They are very volatile. They don't stay at the time you even need them. And that is not a good strategy. The focus should be on how to first attract foreign direct investment. Second, to encourage existing domestic investment. And third, to encourage more new investments, whether foreign or local. That should be the way to go. And that is the way to also diversify the economy. Because you cannot continue to depend on oil.
On just oil, exactly.
Now oil price is already declining. I mean, a lot of players in the economy are getting anxious because if it continues, it could undermine the totality of our macroeconomic fundamentals.
Let's talk about that quickly, because we saw the president present the 2019 budget, and we saw that, talking about the oil sector, our benchmark for oil price was $60 per barrel, which is currently higher than what the oil price as at 22nd of December was trading at $54. Could this be that we are already intending to run at a deficit budget?
Already we are in heavy deficit.
Even
if that assumptions, if those assumptions are valid, you're already in a heavy deficit. But coming back to how realistic the assumptions are. First, you talk about the oil price. Oil price benchmark of $60, just as I saw in your report, is clearly not sustainable. Today, we are talking about oil price at 53 or 54. Then the oil output assumption of 2.3. When we had the decision of OPEC to cut down on our output. When we also have a bit of risk, even in the Niger Delta, concerning the output. So those two assumptions are really optimistic. They don't look realistic. Then there is the assumption of 305 naira to the dollar. I mean, we all know that in the past 2 years or so, exchange rate has been between 360, 365. So why would anybody now use 305 as an assumption for purpose of preparing the budget? And the implication of that is that it will understate the Naira revenue that will go into the Federation account. In other words, 53% of our revenue is coming from oil. So if we are converting, based on this assumption, you'll be converting at 305 to translate that into Naira into the Federation account. So already that has created a shortfall of about 15%, which will not be fair to all the stakeholders, all the tiers of government that have to share from the Federation account. Okay. So we have to come with more realistic assumptions. There's also the assumption of single-digit inflation, slightly over 9%, which was what was projected. I mean, we are dealing with a situation now of inflation of 11.3 or thereabouts. And in the last 2 or 3 months, inflation has been going up. And the chances are that it's likely to even go up much higher. So if you have that kind of scenario, why would we be talking about single-digit inflation? So all these assumptions, I think, will have to be reviewed at the point at which the National Assembly begins deliberation on the budget. Don't forget, what has been presented are just proposals. The final decision as to what eventually will be decided by the National Assembly. And all these developments, all these variables may have to be reviewed.
All right, thank you very much for joining me in the studio. Unfortunately, I mean, I have a whole lot of other questions to ask, but this will be the end for now.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you. Thank you, it's a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
And that's the end of the 2018 Focus in Review for the business sector. I am Irene Ubani. Until next time.